the internet's a passing fad. Actually, while they're doing that, the Freakonomics folks have a new book out, How to Think Like a Freak, and one of the first things they talk about is prediction. Oh, look at that, we got something happening. So anyway, Paul Krugman, who's a brilliant economist, said the value of the internet was really overstated in the late 90s, and that he felt that it would have no more economic impact than the fax machine, because people online would have nothing to say to each other. And he was right that we have nothing to say to each other, but it doesn't stop us from doing it. So, so with that, damn this internet nonsense. There we go. All right. Technology. So, yeah, I'm Jack Daniel. I am, whatever. I'm one of the co-founders of this thing. I get way too much credit for what happens at BSides. BSides happen because of you in this room. They happen because of the organizers. They happen because of speakers, volunteers, and sponsors. I am also, I have a title. It's on my business cards. I work at Tenable Network Security. I don't know what this title means in real life or in my job, but it's cool because they support things like this. First, as we all know, power switch. Wow, watch this. As we all know, today is May 17th, so we're all here to celebrate Constitution Day, which is very important to those of us pear-shaped middle-aged men with male pattern baldness, and that's Norwegian Constitution Day, by the way, for those who don't know. Yeah, okay, let's move on. So, you are here. BSides started less than 5 years ago. 5 years ago today, BSides was not yet an idea. In another week or so, we'll hit the 5-year point where people started whining on Twitter about having their talks rejected. Because that's what Twitter is for. And about 5 years ago, for those of you that have been on Twitter for a while, know that the security community had started to coalesce on Twitter. And there were, several hundred of us that were whining together on Twitter instead of several thousand. But it was starting to happen, and people complained. What we did was we realized that some people were just complaining because their talks should have been rejected. But we also saw that some of the talks really were talks that were good talks. They just weren't Black Hat talks, specifically. I mean, there's some things that Black Hat doesn't want. Black Hat wants technical talks. Black Hat had sort of lost its way in that transition between DT and UVM. They hadn't quite found their stride under their own yet, and DT was focused on BethCon. So we decided that, maybe we should make something happen. And, part of it was the classic, if I can't be in your club, screw you guys, I'm going to start my own club. But we realized we could do a lot better, and so we had an event, and the 303 crew, particularly Chris Nickerson, had a lot to do with making it happen. He usually rents a house, and one thing led to another, and 175 people came through a house in 2 days. And we had a great time, and it was really, relaxed. Mike Dunn did a little setup. He couldn't make the first one, but just everybody showed up and made things happen. And people wanted it to happen again. And so folks threw together a small BSides in Mountain View, California, and then one in San Francisco during RSA, and then Austin and Denver. And then the first year we closed it out with 5, and the 6th one was our first anniversary. And then it sort of took off from there. This is, depending on who started first in what time zone, today there are 3 BSides events. Depending on who's counting what, this is event number 127, 128, or 129. This map is not green dots. The green dots there include new or upcoming new cities. So we're one of the green dots there in Nashville is the first event. We're closing in on 60 unique cities around the world. 29 events at the close of the day today. They all happen because of local community organizers. There are a couple of exceptions, but all of these happen because local people make them happen. They happen because people come together. The size of these events ranges from 10 or 12, or 10 to 14 people to over 700. And each one has its own vibe. And there are very few rules to run a B-Sides. It needs to be community-focused, conversation-focused. It needs to be about bringing people together and having conversation and, all sorts of idealistic ideas, but mostly get together, have a good time, share information. Events where the organizers leave not heavily in debt, and everybody else leaves happily, is a glowing success. We don't try to set high expectations. We try to have a good time, learn and share, and connect. Some of you may know that one of the things that we've done at a lot of B-Sides is connect people who later use the connections to learn, share, advance their careers, advance the industry, and it's been fantastic watching this grow. So, one of the things that drives me nuts about some events, and I won't name names, well, RSA, so there are two things there that drive me nuts, besides the fact that if you've been to RSA, this is a great metaphor for, like, Dante or something. You get on the giant double-height escalators, and you literally descend into the hell of the expo. They treat sponsors and exhibitors like crap because they're just cash cows to be milked. One of the great things about B-Sides is we take the word sponsor seriously. People that sponsor B-Sides are participants. They're part of the community. You get people here who want to talk about what they do, but it's not a sales pitch. It's about being part of the community. It's about the technology. It's about what problems we share. The other thing I hate is the founder's circle thing, right? I've alumni, and I've been here. So B-Sides is a growing community. Growing facilities need to continuously expand their foundations. I believe this is event 35 or B-Sides event 35 or 36 for me. That's nothing special. I've been to more than any of you. I was at the first one. I'm involved in a lot of them. Doesn't matter. Who here is this their first Security B-Sides event ever? That is fantastic. Thank you. Welcome to the B-Sides community. And because this growing community needs a growing foundation, I want to welcome all of you, as well as everyone who's been to another one. You're here for the first time. Welcome to the Founders Circle. You're part of what makes this happen. Now, I like to quote this guy, Newton, and I also like to use earlier photos of him, images of him, because most of the time they show him as an old man, but he was brilliant when he was young, too. And he has a lot of interesting quotes, and I'll close with one later, but one of the things that I think represents B-Sides extremely well is a quote which was not original to him, but he is most famous for it. And that is that if I have seen further, it is only by standing on the shoulders of giants. This community, and not just B-Sides, there are a lot of other groups within some of the DEF CON, the DC groups, the community that's built up around ShmooCon in the past decade, Nauticon, DerbyCon. Now, there's a lot of overlap with these, but there are a lot of fantastic communities in our industry. There are some non-wonderful people in the industry, too. Forget them. Really, I mean, they're entertaining. Train wrecks are fun to watch, but focus on the people in this room who are here to share. When B-Sides, or when our community in general, are doing what we do best, we're a community of shoulders. We provide shoulders for each other, we help each other advance, and move forward. So this is a room full of shoulders helping other people. I do like to recommend everybody wear soft-soled shoes because we are standing on other people's shoulders as well. So with that, let me dive into something. I understand where we are, but I'm going to tell a story that I love to tell because I think it's a great way to introduce this topic, and that is the capital of Texas. So first of all, as a native Texan, I get to make fun of Texas, and I also, being a native Texan is fantastic because it gives me an excuse for any aberrant behavior I exhibit for the rest of my life. For the rest of you, if you need an excuse, I recommend tequila. To give you an idea of the Texas psyche, if you're not aware of this, this is the Texas Capitol. It's a couple of feet taller than the one in Washington, D.C. That just tells you pretty much all you need to know. So anyway, where is that Capitol located? Well, it's located in Austin. Austin, I think, has a special connection to Nashville because, well, not just that it's, there's a lot of blue in the middle of a red area. There's a lot of music, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of drink, and a lot of different types of folks come around. But Austin is the capital of Texas because of this woman. Not exclusively. This is a bit of hyperbole on my part. But one reason is because of Angelina Eberly and her pivotal role in the archives law. December 1842. This is Republic of Texas before it became a state. Sam Houston was trying to move the capital of the Republic of Texas, the independent nation, to his hometown, his namesake town, not his hometown, of Houston. And in the old days, the capital was where the books were. And Austin had all of the records, because it was the capital. And so one of the ways that Houston tried to move this was by force. He sent a team of people with wagons to Austin to break into the National Archives and steal the books. If you think, corporate espionage or whatever, data loss is New Deal, this predates the DBIR by a few years, right? They managed to do it. They actually broke in and were loading the wagons. And Angelina Eberly she was a woman that ran a household. She had a guest house. She did whatever she could. She was a frontier woman. And actually, Sam Houston, interestingly, had been a guest at her house. She woke up and saw a bunch of armed men loading wagons with the books. Now, as was common in the old days, there was a cannon in the town square that was always charged. Now, a lot of people think that was for defense, and it really wasn't a defensive thing. It wasn't loaded with shot, it wasn't loaded with ball, but it had a charge in it at all times. And the reason was that was the way you sounded the alarm. So in the early morning hours, Angelina Eberly got up and realized that something bad was happening, and a single woman, even a frontierswoman like her, was not going to stop a group of armed men. So she ran to the cannon and lit it. It fired, and all of the townsfolk realized that's probably a bad thing when it's still dark. They ran and gathered. Now, meanwhile, the wagons had left, but not by long. They figured out what had happened. They mount on horseback. They overtake the wagons very quickly, capture all of the books, return everything, capture the people, put them in the local jail. Eventually, they sent them back to Sam Houston when he said, all right, I give up. I'm going to stop. But the key to this is that one person saw something that was wrong, was unable to stop this. But the one thing that she had at her disposal was to raise the alarm. And I think that story makes a point about our responsibility to raise the alarm better than a dumb poster in the subway or the airport. So that's what I'm here to talk about. Now, granted, we can't always be hanging on, they're not going to stick me on the wall of the subway in New York City to tell you the story, but it's a lot more compelling if you're trying to get people to understand why they need to tell you, hey, I think I clicked on something I probably shouldn't have. So anyway, let's talk about communication. Here's one of my favorite images. This is from our friend Chris Hoff, Beaker. When we're communicating, we have to figure out what we're trying to do. Sometimes this is okay. right? Believe it or not, this was actually a presentation to a bunch of sales engineers that Hoff was giving at Juniper. He's a VP at Juniper now. And he was loading them up on new product data, competitive stuff. He was melting their minds because that was his job. You know, they had an hour with a VP, and he was going to do a brain dump, and they were going to take the stuff and work for it. But sometimes it's not. So what we have to do is paint a picture for people or present them with an image. But we don't always make it clear what we want you to focus on. So what you need to do is frame that image. So here we have a nice picture. That's Wilson's Arch just south of Moab, Utah. I think I'm supposed to look at the arch. It's not a great photo. We want to frame it for people so it's clear what we're trying to say to them. Now, in this talk, I'm going to ramble all over the place. I'm going to talk about B-sides. I'm going to talk about decks, specifically how to create decks that have a little more impact, and about storytelling. But I'm going to bring focus to these things as I do it, and pick out anything that makes sense to you, and reject anything you don't like. So frame it. Sometimes it takes a little effort to frame this in a way that makes sense. Generally, it does not require scrambling up loose rocks and perching precariously behind some scrub pine, some scrubby cedar to get the frame. But anyway, so let's move on. Decks and die. Here's something we get in a lot of trouble with. When we present at a B-Sides, we have an audience, or at DEF CON, or anywhere, we have an audience willing to work for our content if it's something interesting. So I can put together a bad slide deck, but people will ask. If I do something technical, people will ask for the slides. We'll dig into it. We'll Google it. We'll work to get that information. That's fantastic. We should reduce the amount of work it takes our audiences to get the information, but we get spoiled because people are willing to work for it. In corporate environments, or in environments where you're trying to change somebody's mind, when you're trying to get budget, when you're trying to get hired, when you're trying to do something where you don't have somebody eager for what you're giving, instead of the opportunity to learn from Raph as a presenter, it's the opportunity for Raph to present himself to someone else. When that role flips, yeah, I'm picking on you. When that role flips, right? Love you. When that role flips, we're trying to sell an idea. I mean, sell has a bad connotation. We're trying to push an idea. We're trying to push something, an action. We don't have people that are eager to hear. We've got to convince them, and that's where we often fall down. So we need these decks, and one of the challenges we have is we've all standardized on slide decks. And that's a real challenge because a slide deck is one medium, but everybody wants the deck, so you have to effectively deliver documentation. You can sort of balance it, but it's not the way to do it. So one of the things I like to stress is don't fight your slides. We've all seen these. And you know what? That's all right if you don't dwell on this. If you want to quote a big block of stuff, just click right past it. And that way it's in your deck. Maybe even put it in as a hidden slide if you share hidden slides. That way you've got the raw information there. But don't put this on the screen, because a couple of things. Nobody can read it. And they're there. You have an opportunity to connect with the audience. This text can connect with the audience at any point in time. So if we go to something, like all good vendors, we milk the other vendor reports for whatever we can use to sell you crap. No, I mean sell you solutions to your challenges. So sometimes a quote is handy. So here's a quote that is still true, and it's one of those that I stress with small businesses. They just don't get it straight. Everybody's a target, even if indirectly. So the two favorite stories lately are Kevin Mandia's limo company. I don't know if you guys heard this story. They targeted his limo company to try to spearfish him. Didn't work. They targeted the heating and air conditioning dude at Target. That worked. That ended up poorly. But if you're going to do that, space it out. Make it more readable. Or better yet, make sure the source information is available and tell them what really matters. 63% of the time, third parties introduced deficiencies exploited by hackers. We paid people to be insecure. General rule of outsourcing: never outsource your core competency. Incompetence is a core competency for all of us. Never outsource Oh, yeah. There are a lot of people who will tell you that in an internet age, you don't have to give people credit for stuff. Copyright law, whatever. No, it's the decent thing to do, if nothing else. It is the decent thing to do to the people that generate the content, especially if it's copyrighted, like this particular document I referenced last year. It also means that the people that grab your deck or see your slides know where to go for the rest of it, the other 30 pages, although I'm not sure how much of those 30 pages you actually want, but there it is. I don't give credit for licensed images that I've licensed through photo services. I don't give credit for public domain things or photos that I've taken, like the one scrambling up Wilson's Arch. But if I can, I give credit wherever possible. It's just the right thing to do. For presenters, there are two keys on there's one key on the keyboard, which is fantastic, and that's the B key. If you're not familiar with it, you hit B, the screen goes blank. It's a good way, if you're putting a lot of information on the screen, of pulling focus back. I'm not sure if Keynote does this now. A couple of years ago, it got added to PowerPoint. The W key is interesting at HackerCons. W key goes white. Think about the room you're in. If you're in DEF CON, and so you're in the cave, and you want to wake people up, and there are two giant screens if you're in one of the bigger rooms, and you hit the W key, you have a bunch of blinded hackers. It's kind of mean, but it's good for making a point. So remember the B and W, those can give you a little impact. They also let you do a tangent without, and I'm good at that, so that's why I've got a B key on my clicker. That lets me go off on a tangent and not make it quite as obvious because there's not something different on the board. So back to the deck ideas. Let's stack the deck with the things that we like. Some real fundamentals. We've all heard this. Don't go below 24 point in your presentations. Good rule of thumb. Sometimes you can go smaller, especially if it's not something you're going to dwell on or you're going to drill into it deeper later. I'm not a graphics design guy, but I like having a decent readable font. It turns out there are good reasons for having good readable fonts, because look at these things. One of the things that I do is I put every presentation I do on one of my old laptops, which is now 6 years old. It's an ancient burned-out screen. If my images require too much contrast, if my fonts are too fancy, I will discover it when I look at it on a tiny, crappy screen. That way, if I come in and it's a bright room, no matter how good the projectors or whatever, it makes it easier for me to make sure. Things like that font, I'm sure that looked good as the graphic designer did it. Once that goes through the print, it gets a little fuzzy. The other one, I've made this mistake so many times. 4:3, 4:16, 9. A lot of times, modern projectors don't care. They'll shoot it up, they'll letterbox it, you're good. It doesn't always work that way. If you can find out what you're doing in advance, do it. A lot of things that you do will be presented on screens now instead of projected. They'll be on televisions or monitors. Huge, large screen televisions are used at conferences and events a lot. In those cases, you're looking at 16:9. Go ahead and use all that real estate. But think about that. Think about what's going to look, and maybe if it's high impact and you only have a short time, I've actually walked into presentations with 4 copies of a deck. 4:3 and 16:9, dark background with light text, light background with dark text. Throw anything you can at me, we'll do it, and also walk in with an adapter for VGA and an adapter for HDMI. We're going to put this on your screen because I've only got 10 minutes to talk to you in a corner office in Manhattan, for example. One of my crusades is the bullet. Bullets aren't as bad as I make them out to be, but my take on this is let's get as many bullets out of your presentations as possible. They're grossly overused. In some cases, a bulleted list is kind of handy, but I work with marketing teams, and they love bullets. And so I get decks that I've got to clean up for people, or I've got decks that I need to use bits of, and I pretend I'm an ER surgeon in Baltimore, and I just spend the first few hours pulling bullets out of the patient. And go from there. So I did a presentation at Sands a while ago. I don't even know where this one was. And I used 5 themes, and I had images for the themes. It's a little artsy, but this way the graphics people don't make fun of my decks as much. I'd like to see them, get in front of a group and present. But here we go. I'm using an icon as a bullet. It's a little bit better. There's something. There's a little, if you go through the deck, there's a little humor in it. Numbered lists. So at Tenable, we talk about the Sands Top 20 a lot. A lot of folks talk about the Sands 20. It's kind of training wheels, but the cool thing about the Sands 20 is it's yours, right? You take it, do whatever the hell you want with it. It's not that payment card thing that you have to play by their rules or any of those. This is something you can say, I'm going to take these 3 because that's where I want budget, and I'm going to say, look, Sands says I should do this, right? But instead of doing a numbered list, I took, not that they're nerdly folk here, but yeah, so we grabbed some 20-sided dice, and there's my numbered list. PowerPoint has gotten a lot better. Keynote apparently is slipping the other way, but just because you use Keynote, don't think you're special. I've seen some really horrible stuff out of Keynote, too. And personal preference here. I forgot to grab an airsick bag, but, if you're going to use Prezi, if you have clean, simple, and well laid out presentations, it might work. If you have very busy presentations, people will throw up. If I want to get seasick, I live on Cape Cod, I can go on the ocean. Done. More practical advice. Fewer words, more images. But wait, there are no pictures on this slide. The point is, sometimes this is true and sometimes it's not. Sometimes words can be very powerful, especially if there's a little humor. I don't know who took this picture. This floated around the internet, but this is a brilliant sign. Stay off the tracks. They're only for trains. If you can read this, you are not a train. You win. That's brilliant. Now, I like to focus on simple things, one idea at a time, but that doesn't mean the human brain can't process a lot. If you've ever taken a Tufte course or read any of Edward Tufte's stuff, you know that we can process a stunning amount of data, but you have to present it well. This is the iconic London tube map. It does not take long for this to start making sense, and once you drill in, there's a reason you study this in graphic design and information data viz. Because you look at this like, what am I looking at? Well, I see white and gray. Oh, those are zones. Oh, so if I stay within the zone, I'm good. Okay, different lines. Oh, the circles look like they're... Let's take a closer look. Oh, that's where multiple lines come together. And the red hash... Oh, the red hash... That's National Rail instead of Surface, and there's bus... And, there's little boat icons because it's on the river at Westminster. And then there's a simple... for what you need, but you really rarely get to this point. Once you look at it, you go here and know where you need to go. You look up close, you see which ones are where, and off you go. It's beautiful. It's a ton of information. Now, if you're going to walk people through something like this, that's great. Just know that you've got to walk them through it and understand it. You can push a ton of information. But normally in a presentation, you're not going to do that. You're going to add a bullet, a bit of information at a time, but don't be afraid of putting a lot of information down. If you want a really good example, before they screw it up, the National Weather Service forecast pages, it's an insane amount of information and links to even more on those. There's graphic images of what the weather is going to be coming up, and there's textual, and then there's images of satellite and other overlays, and there's graphic representation of temperature and humidity and rainfall and wind and all sorts of, and it's all on one page, and you scroll up and down and you can absorb a stunning amount of information, but that's to present to people to pull down for themselves. So, doing presentations, proofread and practice. Yes, there are 3 O's in there on purpose. Proofread your materials. We don't often have the time to do it right. Couple of things that really help. Have someone else look at it. It especially helps if someone else is not technical and you're doing technical stuff, because they're going to lose the technical accuracy, but they're going to spot the grammatical and English language issues. Read your deck out loud or any blog posts, whatever you're doing. read them out loud. That really helps. If you can get a real editor to do it, that's fantastic. There is, in the case of blogging particularly, but with almost everything, there is one proofreading tool that will show mistakes better than anything ever invented. It is the publish button. Because you push stuff out live, and there are glaring mistakes that I don't know how you miss. And wait, what? What idiot? Oh. Practice, practice, practice. Different settings, test slides in different light, as I mentioned. Plan B, plan C. So don't assume you're going to have internet access when you're speaking. Don't show up at a conference assuming that you're going to be able to present from Prezi without a local connection. Don't assume that you're going to be able to use Google Docs or whatever, Google Drive, whatever they call that now. Don't assume you're just going to be able to get on the internet reliably, especially at a conference where, well, we're there, right? I mean, look at us. Look at each other. Do you want to connect to the wireless at all? And do you want to rely on that wireless for your presentation? So you've got it on a thumb drive so you can share it. You got it on your laptop. You have your VGA adapter if you need one. Even my new Windows machine requires a VGA adapter because it's an Ultrabook. You know, have your adapter, be ready to present. And then it's important to note that things will go wrong. I have practice works on this. Practice, and so you have that plan B and plan C, so you can roll and recover. That's good. I have a bit of advice that most folks take, but don't necessarily want to. The best thing I've found with the ability to deal with failure, ability to deal with things going wrong, is get old. Because the older I get, the less I give a crap about things. You know, a little perspective really helps. Being a parent is good. Life's unfair to women, but being a mom, boy, you want to talk about putting our petty problems in perspective. You know, try being a mom. Dad's kind of there, but mom's different, right? Because they don't run off to conferences. If you take one thing away from this presentation, if you present with any regularity, annual, a couple times a decade, I put a slide in, a hidden slide at the beginning of my presentation, at the end, or a couple of them, at the end of my presentation. I put notes to myself from delivering the presentation, even if I never plan on delivering that one again. So at BSides Rhode Island, I gave a variation on this. I didn't check the device I was using. I hadn't run it through the VGA adapter I was using, through the VGA capture rig. I forgot to check it, because I actually had both versions of the deck. But like this, it was a different layout, but I didn't have a clear line of sight, so I didn't remember to go, so I made even though I know that, I put it down to do that. One of the things I talked about, stress, spread that information out, but I didn't make it clear, so here we go, I'm going to say that now. If you've got a lot of information, spread it over multiple slides, 1 point per slide maybe. That's a good way to do it. Talk about the power of hidden slides, because this thing is great, and then, I made notes to do that. So, what are we talking about? Audience. Who's the audience? If it's a hacker crowd, it's going to be a different audience than if it's a business crowd. If you're presenting at RSA, it's a different audience than presenting at Cloud Security Alliance in Oslo, where I was a couple of weeks ago. That was cool. They all look like me. Well, not the women. Well, most of them didn't. But, who are they? What do they expect? What motivates them? Especially in these where you're trying to make something happen. Salespeople, and let me stress, there's a difference between people who sell stuff for a living and salespeople. Salespeople may not sell things for a living, but they understand relationships. They understand that building a relationship and understanding who you're talking to and what their needs are is critical. And I'll embarrass them. I'll call, there's a gentleman and a salesman right back there. Charles, we'll catch up later. It's fantastic seeing you. Thanks for Sophos support. you know what these people need and what they expect, and you have a conversation. So if you're trying to sell management on an idea, you need to understand what their issues are. So, we beat this drum continuously. However, you know what? If you haven't been given the choice of renewing the firewall subscription or making payroll, as some of us who've actually been in business have that, it's like, oh, right. Oh, by the way, if you choose firewall, you get to tell the people why they don't get paychecks up until next week? Okay, I guess that firewall can wait. Let's find something open source quick. Know who they are, what motivates them. Are you speaking the same language? So, I do a little bit of overseas presentations. I tend to pull a lot of American humor out. Now, in London, and even in Oslo, British humor tends to be dry and sarcastic. For some odd reason, my humor works there. That works, but I know that. In Berlin, well, humor in Berlin, that's just a bad combination. Oh, yeah. Yes, Zurich. But regional or corporate interests, rivalries, inside jokes. We talk about Texas. If you are in Texas, you can start with, and I've seen musicians and comedians do this, I was just in New York City. You don't even need a punchline, right? People are laughing at you. If you're in the Hudson Valley, just outside of New York City, at one of those places where the Manhattanites go to get into the country, right? You can start your set with, I was just in Houston, and you don't even need a punchline because they're just going to start laughing. So those rivalries are good, but, know what's going on. Appearance, this is an interesting one. The dashingly disheveled look, some of us try for that. The slob look, more of us pull off in this industry. I'm dressed in my BSides attire. I tend to be somewhat flamboyant at BSides because I'm here to have fun. I'm here to put on a show. For the record, flying with a top hat, especially like this, is a bit of a pain. However, there is one cool thing, which is I always have a place for my boarding pass. I just tuck that in there, and then that's see, I clicked. It is handy, although you do get a strange look doing this to put your boarding pass through. Or you go through security. TSA is really used to having people whip off a top hat and drop an ID and whatever on, but that's all right. It's picking on TSA is cool because, well, it's great. Everybody's ranted about TSA too much, but the real problem I have with TSA is hamburgers cost more because McDonald's and Burger King and Chipotle and all those people, they can't hire people at the airport for minimum wage anymore because they are competing with TSA for minimum wage. Wait, that's not nice, Jack. Humor. All right, so obviously I like to use humor. It can backfire on you though. In Massachusetts, we've got 201 CMR 17, the business regulation that tells you how to avoid having a breach so that you don't have to follow 93H, our breach disclosure law. But you have to know the audience. So I often introduce myself, people that don't know me, hi, I'm Jack Daniel, and they will make a comment about Jack Daniel. I say, yes, it's a name and a hobby too. So I tried this line at a state hearing at the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation. Barbara Babs was not amused, right? So, so what's wrong in this picture? The focus is on the presenter, not the audience. A lot of people, especially the first time they speak at conferences in our industry, not just in our industry, lose that. Ooh, I got a speaker badge. That's cool. That's your opportunity to share what you know and help other people learn. It is not about you. Now, to a certain extent, it is, because otherwise you wouldn't dress up like an idiot and put on a top hat and come out here. But it's a shared responsibility you need to deliver to the audience. With that, let's see if this works. Because this is a dry campus and it is morning, I have not soaked this in gin this morning. So just a simple riff. It's I can't even play that straight up. but it's not really satisfying. Could be the beginning of a song. You can play with this. This is a musical idea of tension. Some notes just don't leave you satisfied. So make it a little more interesting. Do the train whistle thing or whatever, but it still hangs there. And that idea of creating tension is key to communication, whether it's poetry, prose, music, whatever. Oh, that one. Da-da-da-dum. We all know that from the blues song. But that closes it off. So we build some tension, we play with the tension a little bit, and then we close it off. That's what happens in music. Poetry, prose, tension and release. It's a key to communication. What does it have to do with this? Well, we're storytellers. As a society we are. These computers we use for storytelling, they don't exist on the timeline, whatever timeline you want to use. And we talk about, instead of tension and release, we talk about character conflict and resolution. And this is, if I'm teaching you how to use a piece of technology, I'm going to explain how you suffer, whether it's a sales thing or I'm trying to teach you how to get started within that. I'm trying to sell you on an idea. I'm going to talk about the challenges you face. We're going to talk about character and then how to solve that challenge. Character, conflict, and resolution. So I happen to know where we are. There's a little history of music. Country music, back when country music was real and Nashville was about both kinds of music, country and western, not this bubblegum country crap that they have on the radio now. I have some opinions about music, right? Thankfully, somebody came up with Americana to call anything we don't know what else to call it, and so all sorts of people have a genre now, it's kind of weird. But anyway, Hank sang, now there are other songs that Hank's better known for, but this one's great. My son calls another man daddy. You don't need to know anymore. The song goes a lot better, but that title tells the story right there. Johnny shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. Only lyrically as far as we know, but who knows. And then, arguably, the quintessential country song, George Jones sang He Stopped Loving Her Today. One of the interesting things about country songs, particularly those older ones, is that they cheat and they use the lack of resolution or an unsatisfactory resolution to deliver an emotional impact. So in the first two examples, we have people in prison. They're not getting out. There's not a satisfactory resolution. There's not a satisfactory resolution in the other one. This is very powerful in some forms of storytelling, particularly in country music, blues music, Americana music, things that actually have some soul to them. It's very powerful. Don't do that to your audience if you're trying to get them to do something. You do not want them to leave weepy. You do not want them to feel unhappy. You do not want them to want to just run home and hug the kids or whatever. You want them to give you budget, right? That's it. So, make things real, even in fiction or metaphor. People, places, events, they need to be real. I'll read this quickly. I hate to read things off this. This is fantastic. So I like to use metaphors and analogies. A good metaphor for life is a man trying to eat soup out of a spaghetti strainer. He goes really fast because he's trying to get to the good stuff, but no matter how much he gets, he just ends up with a bunch of soup all over his pants, and then he dies of old age. Oh, I'm not very good at metaphors. All right. If you're trying to use creative imagery, metaphors, analogies, they need to actually work. How many of us have been taught electricity by talking about plumbing? All right, so it's good if the way we talk about amps and volts and watts and whatever is talking about water pressure and valves and switches. Once you start talking about diodes as anti-backflush valves and captive air tanks as capacitors, you've gone too far. So what you do is, it's not like this, think about it like this until you start to think like an electrician, right? Don't push that. I just, in the image, I have no idea. And storytelling doesn't work everywhere. All right, so mastering Metasploit in a grim fairy tale style, I don't know. It may be grim for the people that you pop on, whose enterprises you pop with Metasploit, but it doesn't always work. So look for stories. We miss the stories around us all the time because we have that comfort thing. I have the luxury of traveling a lot. I get a lot of stories. For example, some years ago, I was in San Francisco. I was at that RSA conference. I look up, I'm in my hotel, I look up before I go up to my room, and I see this intricate facade, and it's beautiful. I mean, look at all of the detail on this. This is phenomenal. That's great. And I go into my room, and I look down. And I see all of the crap it takes to make this facade, this fake thing, look pretty, and realize the first time that building shakes hard, which does happen in San Francisco, that crap's falling on the sidewalk and crushing people. That in no way is a metaphor for the expo floor and the software on sale, hardware on sale at RSA. It just happened to, well, maybe. Is it relevant to your audience? Okay, so there are some people who are not terribly young in this audience. First time I was in Berlin, the only time I've been into Berlin, we went to the mall. Well, the big mall happens to be right where the wall used to run through. You could spot the age of folks and whether or not they or their parents had been in the military. Because for some of us whose parents fought the war, as mine and my wife's did, we got to the wall, tourist trap or not, and we just kind of... And our childhood and young adults and adolescence and young adulthood kind of rolled back. And what our families went through, who did what and when, the weight of that settled on us. For younger people, it did not matter. It wasn't that they didn't get it, it just wasn't the impact. Watch what you use. You know, so this is a mixed audience. Some of you really get the significance of the wall. Cool. Does it make sense? I'm going to skip a ton of slides because I always put too much in and go where we want to go. But this is one, and again, on that thing, what's important? I realize this gentleman is better known, that's the drummer, by the way, not for Memphis. But you got to know what's important to you, to your presentation, to the people you're speaking to. Another one of my favorite stories. This is Lucille, not the drummer. The drummer is not named Lucille, to the best of my knowledge. The guitar is. Winter of 1949, B.B. King played a dance hall in Twist, Arkansas, which is less than an hour outside of Memphis. In those days, these were just wood frame buildings with wood sides, wood floor. Heat was a 55-gallon drum half full of kerosene, lighted on fire. That was heat. So BB and the band are playing. Two guys start fighting. They knock over the barrel. Let's do the math on what happens if you put 25 gallons of burning kerosene on a wooden floor in a wooden building. Everybody ran out. B.B. King got out. Realized a guitar that he had just paid $30 for a year or two before. His beloved guitar was not one of these. Ran back in and grabbed it off the stage and ran back out. They got in their car and drove away. Next day, they heard on the radio, saw on the paper, the details. People had died in that fire. People had been injured in that fire. Fires are ugly. And what had started was two men were fighting. They were fighting over a woman. The woman's name was Lucille. Since 1949, every guitar that B.B. King has played has been named Lucille, as a reminder never to do something that stupid again. B.B. King needs a guitar. Ideally, it needs to be an ES-355 because that's what he's been playing for a very long time. He's one of the few, for the guitar aficionado, he's one of the few people that plays the true ES-355, which is a stereo guitar. which is part of the reason some of his stuff sounds the way it does without having to go through the engineering. But he needs one of these. You can pick one of these up at a local guitar shop. They may have to order it for you, but this is a model that Gibson has stocked for decades. He doesn't need this one. He needs a guitar. What's important to you? What's not? I'm going to skip through this very quickly. This is an example of something that I did a few years ago, surviving a teleporter accident. This was a talk where I discussed what happens when you're at an event and you end up teleported and you have no idea where you are or when you are and what you do with it. Well, so, the Hitchhiker's Guide. So the way this story progresses is look at where you are. Are there immediate dangers? Look at your environment. Look around you. Are you dead? You got a chance of survival? Is this a big threat or a little threat? If it's got malaria, it's a big threat. Otherwise, can you eat this? Can you eat that? Little bunnies, they're tasty. They're cute and they're tasty, and clover's great. Oh no, this bunny's not. Shelter, where are you? What do you need to protect yourself from? Fire good, fire bad. Did you stop looking for this? What happens if there are people around? How does that change this? So here's the key. This wasn't about teleporter accidents. We talked about topics. We talked about threat modeling. And so I went through these list of things and put this in a very amusing list of survival. So there were a lot of moving pieces in this presentation. Bounced around a lot. B-sides, presentations, decks, storytelling. Take what you will from this. Hopefully it was a little informative and a little entertaining or some mix thereof. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad that I have a job that is awesome enough that this is, on the clock for me. I will do the shameless self-promotion. I am easy to find on the internet. I do that podcast thing that used to be called Paul.com before the lawyers got involved. I'm on the Twitters. I have a couple of blogs. The travel blog is one where I hardly ever post, just like the other one. But that's my Drunken Con blog. I just refer to it as a travel blog. If you haven't seen it, Gary McGraw does a much better travel blog. He does real detail, but Gary does most things better than most of us. And with that, I have one last thought. And many years ago, someone said this: I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have only been like a boy playing by the seashore, diverting myself and now and then finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before me. This is another Isaac Newton quote. Newton's perspective on his accomplishments at the end of his life was that the great ocean of truth was undiscovered before him, and he had just focused on some interesting shells and smoother pebbles. And he changed the way we see the world around us for the rest of human existence. We may not change the way the world looks, but we can change the way it looks to us. We can find those pebbles, we can find those shells, we can find the things that interest us, explore them, share what we know. You're at an event where you will find people who will help you find the pebbles and explore those shells and comb the beach together. And so take advantage of that. Welcome to BSides Nashville. For those that are new, welcome to the BSides community and the Founders Circle. And with that, with the rest of the day, find those pebbles. Thank you very much.